All right. So as I'm massaging my leg, I was thinking, looking at my foot. I'll show you. So that foot is difficult to put flat on the ground right now because I need to massage it because it's very cramped up. So I don't know if I can put it straight so you can see. Okay. So, anyways, that's been happening for a long time since I was younger. Um, and I still remember instances when we would play sports or even when I was at the gym where the elderly women would see me massaging myself and they'd be like, and I was still in high school, and I remember they're like, oh, when you're done with you, do us, like, because after I always knew that I needed to keep up with my physical therapy. So even in high school, I did 3 or 4 hours of physical therapy in the gym so that I would not lose my ability to walk. And I could ride bikes with heels on. That's how strong I eventually got my ankles to be. So I'm gonna work on this bitch. But anyways, I digress. Let's start it off with a happy note because what I'm actually gonna talk about isn't very happy at all. So as I'm massaging, I a memory came up, a very specific memory that has come up a lot. A lot. It's come up when the chiropractor was working on my hip. It's come up when they're working on my shoulder because believe it or not, our gait does affect our pain in our shoulder too. So our ankle, it affects our bladder and it affects other things too. So I remembered a memory, and I remember all of the instances where I've been processing trauma in the last few weeks. All of those instances when you're still developing your cognitive awareness and also your skills to defend yourself. Okay, not only to defend yourself, but also to either walk in truth or learn how to lie. And so, in those instances, instead of taking accountability, my mom always deflected. She always deflected. They always joked around about things that they shouldn't have been joking around because, as a neurodivergent child, I took things very literally. So I didn't like that they were always lying to my face. It's very traumatic to me. And I know that to them, it seems like little white lies or things they brushed off because my mom's belief was treat them like they're normal kids and they won't get sick. They might get better because childhood illnesses do go away. But also, if you're always ignoring your children when they're telling you that their childhood illnesses are flaring up, because my mom knew that since I was little, my legs would flare up and she needed to always carry Tylenol with her. Why was that information not given to the person who I'm going to be talking about in my story? And especially because he was our caregiver for the day because he was transporting us. Okay. So it was a trip to Mexico. It was my twin brother and I, and we were traveling with a cousin. Okay. And mind you, this cousin and his wife were very verbally and physically abusive to me for dragging my feet and also for not, for being too sensitive and things like that because essentially I was always talking back when they were being abusive. And so his wife hit me a lot, a lot. So even now, when I worked with her as an adult, she totally ruined that relationship because she felt that because she had some kind of hierarchy, because she was my cousin's wife and I was 20 years younger than her, she somehow had the right to be abusing a child, a teenager, and then an adult. And that went well into last year. So, and it's all of these things that are arising as I'm massaging my leg. Because remember, anytime you're working on your muscles, things like that can come up. And it's a great time to process them from a different perspective. And reminding myself, you know what? You were being honest. You were telling them how it was. And they were, in fact, ignoring you. I even wrote a poem about it. I'll attach it to the description. Um, However, so before our trip to Mexico, my mom wanted us to be dressed nice because whatever dress we were wearing on our day to Mexico, because you had to ride airplanes looking your best. was usually the Sunday outfit that my auntie would use when we would go to church. And then those dresses, once we came back from Mexico, would stay for my nieces in Mexico. And so, ay. And so, right before the trip, we went to buy clothes, a dress, and shoes. And so when we were at the store, both me and my mom liked a pair of shoes more than any of the other ones, but they were a little bit big for me. And it wasn't a huge amount, it was less than a finger, it was like that. But enough to cause a blister if I start dragging my foot, which was the case that happened. Not if I'm walking correctly, but if I'm dragging my foot, yes, it can chafe. You know, it chafes even if the shoes fit properly. Even the brace chafes when I'm dragging my foot because when I'm tired, it's hard to lift my foot. And so she told me, don't worry, honey, you'll grow into them. By the end of the summer, you'll fit your shoes well and you'll be able to use them. Yeah, within weeks they fit because kids grow quickly. I was 7 or 8 years old. Kids grow very, very quickly. And I believe it was the year that we stayed down there for a full year, like in fourth grade or something like that. So essentially, I did get a good use of those shoes. But it was one of the years that was most revealing to adult behavior. And so basically, the airplane got detoured to Guadalajara, which was 4 hours or 6 hours away from where we lived. And instead of landing 2 hours away, which was the peak. And so we needed to take a bus. So we had to walk as quickly as possible to the bus so that we would not miss the bus. And so, because there was a big suitcase, instead of paying for those little carts, my cousin was insistent that we were all going to help carry it, my twin brother and I, as a way to keep us from getting lost. He had us hanging on to the suitcase. So I was basically being dragged at the back of the suitcase because I was being hurried to walk. So it was doubly exhausting. By then, the tension headache had become a migraine, and both of my legs were starting to give out. Instead of when I started crying, I was a child. I didn't know about migraines. I didn't know what happened to my head was about migraines. Sometimes I would get them when I was playing, and my mom would tell me that it was because I was playing. So I wouldn't play. Like I was that kid that was scared of playing with the other kids because if I played too hard, I got migraines because of the heat intolerance, because my head, the back of my head has always hurt, always. And so when you're blaming your children and telling them this is because of this, because you don't know why your kid gets headaches, but you know your kid gets headaches every time they fucking, it's not because they're playing. Don't fucking tell them. Learn about the condition so you can teach them about the condition so they don't hate their bodies growing up, because I hated my body growing up. However, when he asked what was wrong, I kept grabbing my head and I was like, my feet hurt, because all I could think of was the blister that I was developing on my foot. I didn't realize what was happening to my head was what was happening to my head. Because migraines for me always start with ringing, my vision gets impaired, which is what was happening, and the ringing, sensory issues, and overwhelming. Trips always were sensory overwhelming for me anyways. So growing up my entire life, when they would bring up that story and I would try to correct them, my mom would always say, well, you chose those shoes, didn't you? Yeah, with your guidance. With your guidance. And you could have made your children comfortable, not beautiful, to go on a trip, just because you didn't know that the fucking plane was going to be detoured. You could have taken some responsibility there. My cousin could have taken responsibility when he was making fun of me because I couldn't keep up. And he then made fun of me for the shoes up until and not even last year, because I stopped talking to about 3 or 4 years ago. And honestly, best decision I ever made. Best decision I ever made. But always made fun of me because of the shoes. When we got back from Mexico, and I told her what had happened, and I was very upset, that he didn't know how to help me when my legs were hurting that bad in my head. And my mom tried to minimize it. My mom minimized it to the point where she was like, well, you wanted to go to Mexico. What did you expect? You guys wanted to be in Mexico. If I would have known that my decision to be sent to Mexico while you guys were fighting a court case was my decision was going to be that painful, I might have not made it. I might have stayed with you and not wanted to. I would have been superly attached to you if I would have known that my medical needs would not be taken care of if I wasn't with you, because I chose to go on vacation and I chose to go to school in Mexico. Yeah, you convinced us that it was our choice so that we would accept being sent to Mexico for a full year. But do you also remember the commentary, woman? Yo no voy a tener hijos pendejos. So you sent each one of us to a year in Mexico so that you wouldn't have pendejos hijos. You wanted them to learn, read, and write. But you didn't want to take responsibility for that decision. You wanted it to be our decision. Very convenient. So even when I had my passing out incident at school, they had no idea what was going on, and I was delirious for days, needing IV fluids the first day, but my brother getting lost when the teacher sent him to go get my aunt who lived up the street, but motherfucker went to town over because I don't know what's wrong with my brother's brain. And yeah, so these are my memories of my medical care. Okay. So that in particular made me ignore my feet for a very long time. I didn't play, I played sports, but very limitedly. I played sports that required if I competed, I played sports that required very little running, because even in volleyball, I tended to roll my ankle. And I did play competitively in sixth or seventh grade. It wasn't until high school that my brother's girlfriend noticed that I had an issue with both ankles. I kept rolling them in dance. I wanted to give up on dance, and it was one of the things that brought me the most joy. And thank you, Booba. You really did take care of me. She bought me my first sports bras because my mom kept insisting I didn't need them. But for track, it was very painful to run track without a sports bra because of my shoulder pain and everything. So it was helpful. She bought me my first ankle braces so that I wouldn't roll my ankles. She taught me about compression sleeves when my shins and my knee joints started to get bad. And she was in the military, so I guess that y'all learn very good how to take care of your bodies after you beat the fuck out of them. So a lot of these symptoms went unnoticed in middle school and high school because I was taught by adults to ignore them. As my ankle got worse and weaker, and since nobody believed me anyways, and they just kept telling me it was migraines when my left side was getting weaker and weaker, I just didn't do anything. So about 2.5 years ago, when I started having more frequent falls, and the stress of what was going on at my friend's house just got out of control and started causing more symptoms because of their behavior and my insistence in thinking that my presence was making a difference. But it wasn't. It was making me sicker. And so I want to remind you guys, chronic stress, even if you're no housing situation and no housing situation and no relationship is worth your chronic stress. I try not to avoid helpful stress like my art, trying to find employment, trying to fix my stuff so that I can be functional in the world, going to all these appointments, trying to hopefully be able to be in front of a screen for work again. Maybe I can finally finish my bachelor's. But since it hasn't been an option, I also have to live with the radical acceptance that it might not be an option. I have also decided to start healing these aspects of myself and reminding myself it wasn't my fault. Those were adults that were guiding you. Adults that minimized your pain Adults that even minimize dislocations, because even my cousin's wife would help me put my fingers back into place when I would pop them out and I played basketball, because my mom was never home. She was always at work and my dad was useless when it came to that. So, medical neglect is serious when you're constantly asking for help and it's being minimized. Because even though my mom didn't minimize everything, when things did get serious enough that it was outwardly visible, she did take me to get medical care. But she took me to a doctor that was incredibly biased in Tijuana, who I have learned to dislike as much as my mother for the level of medical neglect um, in his presence as well. Um, I realize, I realized that I was taught these unhealthy skills of ignoring my body through humiliation, through shame, and through blame and projection. This was my biggest fight with my mother and my sister, that they were always yelling at me, telling me that I had to take responsibility and accountability for all the things that I had done. But everything that they're asking me to be accountable for is what they did, their mistakes, their harm. And they want me to be accountable for their mistakes when I still did the work, taught myself, and got out and got the care that I needed. It's really hard to heal from that. If you're still in it, find a way out, dude. No roof over your head is worth people chronically stressing you until you develop chronic conditions, and then humiliating you, gaslighting you, shaming you, and mistreating you in order to convince you that you have mental problems and not actual medical problems. In order to convince you that it's your mental problems the reason that they're mistreating you and neglecting you, and not their mental problems and their lack of consideration of other people's health. Because honestly, that kind of stuff affects the human body in ways that becomes long lasting. Because this wasn't, I've said it since the beginning, all of my videos since the beginning. It's not just Kaiser that fucked up by not giving me consistent care when it was getting weaker and weaker. Because since my car accidents back in 2016, this shoulder, this hip, this knee, the shoulder was always popping out, and they just didn't believe me. I'd go to the ER, they'd send me to an appointment, then the guy would ignore me and send me to acupuncture, like acupuncture is going to put your shoulder back into place. And I would get sent home like this. All because of the mental health story that not only family members created, because all of the abuse leading up to me being placed on a 5150 was the information that doctors needed to accuse my actual medical conditions on mental health conditions because of the abuse I was sustaining at home. Even though the abuse was exacerbating medical conditions and medications that were the incorrect medications were creating mental problems that went away when the medications were stopped. This is why I advocate for proper medical charting. And once you realize that a mistake was done, correcting that mistake on people's charts, so that once we are able to get out of domestic violence situations, because whether these individuals want to admit that it was domestic violence or not, it was a very covert and coercive way of abusing someone until they no longer trust themselves, and until they are no longer themselves. Because this was my whole life. My sister has even dragged me. I'd be holding on to the car door and she'd be dragging me when she would pick me up from school because she thought it was funny. because she didn't understand that my laughter was from fear and nervousness because I was trying to get in the car, and before I would even put my foot, she would start moving the car. It's abuse. People who aren't okay in the head are going to abuse. And your nervous system always being, because I honestly, that's what I was telling a friend the other day. Just, I miss my brother, I miss my mother, but seeing them makes my whole body feel like it's on fire because of what they did and how they tried to cover it up, how they tried to lie out of taking responsibility and accountability. Now I'm once again, because it's not the first time, repairing a muscular skeletal system that was harmed by too much stress. Do not stay in stressful situations, even though you think you can tolerate, because yes, your body will build tolerance, but what you're actually building tolerance to is cortisol, adrenaline, in some cases, all of the happy hormones, which apparently even your body produces amphetamines because of the love bombing degradation cycle of a narcissistic family unit. Just keep that in mind because it will destroy your nervous system. It will take your ability to think. It will take your education if you were like me trying to get your BA. It will take your ability to do things like walk, talk, do things for yourself. Too much stress kills. And conditions that may have not been flared up or active in my body are flared up and active because of the conditions I was living in. And even though I'm still under stress living in the conditions that I'm under in now, they're still thousands times better than what I was putting up with and being convinced and told that it was me and my lies and my faking and my hypochondria, because that's what my mom would call me, a hypochondriac, trying to get attention. Okay. Until she would see me super sick. Then she was the very concerned mother trying to be in the hospital. I see you now, Mom. I love you, I see you, and I hope you heal so you never do this to someone ever again. I hope they all heal. I hope I heal. I hope I get my legs back fully so that I can dance again because you don't get to have that. Fully so I can hike again because you don't get to have that. I hope I get my mind back because you don't get that either. And maybe my anger and rage might be enough to slowly get me there. Do not teach your children to ignore their bodies when they are small. That cognitive awareness of our physical body allows us to stay in our body even after trauma. The more you learn to ignore the body, the less you're able to tell when the body is getting sick from being in places that are making them ill. And it's true, the longer I've been out of the home, the more it affects me to see or think about these people, the more it affects my nervous system. Because now my body feels safe enough to process what was done. Keep that in mind. Take care of your loved ones. And don't make excuses for your lack of accountability. Because the only reason people like me are alive is because we took accountability and responsibility for everything in our life. The reason we are able to get up after being so far down in our health is because we take full responsibility for our health and our actions in it, our cooperation in that process. For years, you convinced me to stop seeking answers because of how much stress it was causing me, when you were the added stress. Because either way, I still have to do all the testing and get these baselines done. The only difference now is that I'm doing it alone. And that stress is different But at least it's not the added stress of someone trying to convince me that it's all in my head or that I'm crazy. Gaslighting into thinking that I'm wrong for my body not getting better. Blaming me for how my body was deteriorating because of your neglect and your abuse and what you were permitting in your own home. No more excuses for anybody. When you do this to a child, this is what happens to them as an adult. They stay in harmful situations too long, not just with family, but with partners. You want your daughters to be strong? Teach them to trust their body. You want your sons to be respectful? Teach them about their bodies so that they are fully responsible for themselves and your daughters aren't taking care of your sons and your sons aren't abusing other women, because that's how you damage the next generation. Teach your daughters not to date men like that, and teach your sons not to be around women that don't take accountability, because it breaks them too. I love you and have a good day.